physical anthropology was developed as race science. It was developed specifically to classify people into groups based on so-called racial characteristics. And so that's why you might notice, Dr. Mahoney, since you are a linguistic anthropologist, the subtlety when we talk about, or when Dr. Bether and I talk about physical anthropology versus biological anthropology. So physical anthropology, we're referring to yesterday when race science was what physical anthropology was about. Biological anthropology, we're referring to the discipline that we're a part of today. But there were several scholars who were engaged in trying to say, I've got problems with this idea that we can just put people into groups and those characteristics are going to be definitive of people from Africa, people from Europe, people from Asia, indigenous people. And some of those people included the first African-American physical anthropologist, Montagu Cobb, who wrote about famous African-American track athletes in the 1930s. One of whom, incidentally and coincidentally and amazingly, was my grandfather, which is really, really just, when I read that paper and opened it and saw his photograph, it was a really emotional moment for me. But he talks in that paper about, because at the time, newspapers and others were saying, wow, there's got to be something special about the Negro athlete, that these athletes are doing so exceptionally well. There's got to be some anatomical, difference between, the Negro athlete and the white athlete. And so he was one of the first to say, I kind of have, a slight problem with this. Franz Boaz was another anthropologist who was engaged in saying, I'm not so sure about this biological race idea. And there certainly were others, Ashley Montagu, who wrote a book called Man's Most Dangerous Myth. So there were a number of anthropologists in the early to mid 20th century saying, this isn't okay. I've got some real problems with this concept. And then in the 1970s, there was a paper by Richard Lewanton, which came out, which looked at human variation and specifically said there's more variation within groups than there is between groups. And so that was really one of the starting points. There were others, but that was one of the starting points for physical anthropologists to start to say, okay, now we're starting to have some evidence that this concept is really problematic. And as Dr. Beathard mentioned, it was really in the 1990s in physical anthropology when more people started to get on board with the debunking of the concept. Although, as he mentioned, forensic anthropologists still held on to it, and there were, a number of, or in particular, two famous papers that say, well, yes, there is no biological race, but at the same time, we are really good at identifying them. And I'm not sure that I want to go into the details of why it is that we are able to do it, but maybe and I want to couch that as well, because I'm not so sure that we can do it that well.